So I'm going to be talking to you about some work I did over the last year as a capstone for my master's thesis. I did this under the supervision of Prof. Joey Key at the University of Washington, Bothell. And I worked on the code that our last speaker mentioned in the answer to my question, a portion of it called GBM-CMC, which is Tyson Wittenberg's code. And he also collaborated on the approach to this. So I'm going to focus on ultra-compact binaries. Our last speaker talked a little bit about these, so I'm not going to belabor this too long. They're very dim. Optically, we only know about the ones that are essentially in our stellar neighborhood. They're expected to be far and away the most numerous Lisa source, and they form this sort of confusion background for other sources. So characterizing them is important, essentially because your signal is my noise and my noise is your signal. Now, for Lisa sources, and especially for these sources, they're continuous sources. So we have to fit the total number of sources and the source types and the source parameters sort of all at the same time. And the particular code I modified uses a transdimensional Markov chain Monte Carlo approach to this. If you are steeped in Lisa data analysis, you probably already know this, but the sort of basic idea, if you're joining us from outside of that, is that you take a Metropolis Hastings Markov chain Monte Carlo, and then you appropriately weight jumps between higher and lower dimensional models of your data. And it turns out that this mostly works for compact binaries, and that you can also integrate this into a larger global fit package, and you can check out those citations to get sort of the full details on that. Why focus on distance? So this is a map from another paper of galactic binary gravitational wave posteriors in a simulated Milky Way galaxy. And so you can see that they're basically in the Milky Way because they're stellar remnants. And before this project, the search space for this package was amplitude, frequency, and f dot, along with all the location and orientation and phase parameters. The thing is, if you're interested in compact binaries or in stellar evolution, compact binaries don't have gravitational wave amplitude. They're a certain distance away, and they have a certain mass. So those are the actual underlying physical variables that you're more interested in. You're also potentially interested in the astrophysical deviations in f dot that would give us things like common envelope dynamics or mass transfer. So you can take an amplitude-based catalog from gravitational wave observations, and you can back out mass and distance. But this runs into some, not necessarily problems, but some sort of troubles that you have to work through. Because it's a Bayesian approach, your search implicitly includes an amplitude prior, which is coming from some physical assumptions that you made about the population of galactic binaries, which is the thing you're trying to study in the first place. And additionally, your mass and distance prior assumptions, because of this, don't really directly enter the search. And then you're using some, hopefully the same physical assumptions on the post-processing to take your amplitude data and pull back out some sort of distribution of mass and distance for each of the sources that you've identified. So the sort of heart of this project is integrating distance and mass into the transdimensional MCMC so that when we're actually doing the global fit search, we're both informing the number of sources and the parameters from one set of physical assumptions in what is a relatively sort of clean inference. So in order to do this, we have to change the search space of the Markov chain Monte Carlo algorithm. So I'm just switching amplitude out for mass and distance. Chert mass is the mass parameter we chose for this. And this is how we're converting. We're just assuming very idealized binaries here. This is our conversion from mass distance to amplitude. Finally, we switched the f dot parameter to be non-gravitational wave contributions to f dot. So f dot astro is our free parameter, and since we have distance and mass in our representation, we just derive f.gr using that expression as part of the search process. For the prior on distance, I'm using a galaxy prior that was a simple Bulgin disk model of the galaxy that was part of the code from the beginning. It was used in the prior for sky location, and also adding an isotropic contribution to that. So the isotropic contribution is there because if you don't have prior support outside of the disk of the galaxy, your exponential disk model essentially suppresses you finding any binary sources outside of the galaxy, and you would actually like to find them if they're there in your data. And the construction of this was essentially 1/r² at the tails, so that we don't weight toward long distances where all the volume is, softened by a length near Earth, so that it doesn't blow up right near Earth either. Because going back a couple slides, you may have observed that this parameter space is degenerate and has the standard mass distance degeneracy. So doing this actual translation on all of the proposals in the current GBM CMC pipeline did require some work. So this is sort of a cross-check of the proposals. This is some detailed balance results. So if you haven't worked with Markov chain Monte Carlo before, you set the likelihood equal to 1, and then your expectation is that you get essentially your prior back as your posterior. So these are prior densities on sky locations on the far left. And what you're seeing there, that line is actually the disk of the galaxy, and the bright spot is the core of the galaxy. And then the next column is the posterior samples when running the modified code. And I've also included on the left showing the prior in blue and the posterior in orange over distance with an integration region. So the little red boxes are the integration region. So on the top, we're looking sort of through the galaxy right next to the core of the galaxy. And here we're looking out of the galaxy. And you can see that we're getting some agreement there. It's not perfect because some of the proposals actually do some smearing of the posterior. So the peaks are all a little bit wider. So when we do this and we run it on the LDC, the Lisa Data Challenge Radler data set, it's able to match sources approximately at the level that the earlier code was able to. This is a frequency amplitude diagram. The injections are the little crosses and dots. And you can see the posteriors in frequency and amplitude space graphed over the top of it. And then the summary chart is just showing for other bands. This is around 4 millihertz, but just sort of spot checking other bands. The lower numbers are how many sources are being identified. This is what our mass and distance posteriors end up looking like. So for a fairly bright source in that same 4 millihertz band that I was showing on the last slide, you get the sort of very clean, it sort of shrink wraps around the degeneracy line for the amplitude of that source because amplitude's well defined. And for sort of a mid brightness, mid SNR source, you get these sort of like more blobby things. So you're getting some information here, not necessarily enough to determine a distance really, really well, except if sky location and brightness are sort of on your side here, but definitely enough to sort of eliminate some areas of parameter space. So yeah, this modification sort of includes the distance prior and the full inferences. It identifies sources. It has a slightly longer convergence time because we've added a parameter. And we are getting somewhat what we would expect for posteriors. In future, defining a sort of a more informed prior on f.astro might help us figure out which systems are common envelope, using that as a search parameter, and the galaxy prior could also be updated to have some more features of the actual Milky Way that we know about. And that's all I have for you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the speaker?
really nice talk. So on the slide where you had the posteriors of the amplitudes, the one before this? Yeah.
Yes.
So am I reading it right that for higher amplitudes, the posterior is more spread out? And is there a reason for that?
Yeah, so you are seeing that in this plot. One of the things that is happening with the amplitude here is that the ones that have the more spread out amplitude in the posterior are also in places where there are other lower amplitude sources, and it's sort of an artifact of this particular frequency band that some of those, like for instance, the one marked 14 there. The reason that's large is because of sources 16, 9, and 0, which was not identified below there. So it's sort of a crowded field effect is part of why that, it's the big reason why those are so large. Yeah.
Do we have any more? Okay, well, let's thank the speaker.